to this computer. There we go. Share screen. Go from there. And I'm going to share this. And you should see Jesus.
Jesus.
Jesus. Or Esau, as we're about to find out. So let me go next. So the first slide here is just to kind of let you know, we're learning about Jesus and Islam, like what we did with the sermon. And the words are interchangeable here. So if you hear other words, either in this presentation or anywhere in life, Islam is not talking about a different person. It's just their Arabic language saying a word differently. Kind of like Paul and Saul is really the same name. He didn't have his name changed. Saul and Paul is just how you say it in different languages. So God and Allah, that's the same word. Now, Allah is just an Arabic word for God. So if you are an Arabic-speaking Christian, and there are Arabic-speaking Christians out there, because Arabic is simply a language, it's not a religion, it's just a language. So if you are an Arabic-speaking Christian with an Arabic Bible, you would say Allah whenever you refer to God. If you're an English-speaking Muslim, you might say Allah, but you might also say God because you speak English, and God and Allah is the same thing. Jesus and Isa are the same thing. So if you ever hear a Muslim referring to Isa, he's referring to Jesus. Mary and Miriam, same person. Anne and Hannah, Joachim and Imran are all similar characters. So I'm just kind of laying this out as we kind of get into our study today. This is what we talked about on Sunday in church. We talked about the grandparents of Jesus. In English, it would be Joachim and Anne, and they had the baby Mary. We're going to learn more about that. The Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church still celebrate St. Anne and St. Joachim as parents of Mary. So that's very much in the tradition of the Eastern Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church and the Catholic Church. Again, that they're grandparents of Jesus, but they're not mentioned in the Bible at all. So then we have to explore the question, if they're not mentioned in the Bible anywhere, then where are we getting our information from? Why are they central figures to the Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church? They must have gotten their information from somewhere. Well, as we've talked about here before, there are many other books that did not make it into the Bible. So this is a list of Gospels that we know of other than Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. All these Gospels exist. So many of these we have either in fragment or complete Gospel, and we can read the Gospel. So we're going to look at one of these Gospels. The Infancy Gospel of James, written around 150 CE. And a couple things to note is it's Infancy Gospel of James. So think of the theology of James, and maybe this is more pigeonholed information in your brain for a later discussion we might have in some other Bible study at some point in time as we learn a little bit more detail the difference between the theology of James and the theology of Paul. But this is the Infancy Gospel of James, not written by James, he's long dead, but clearly a school of thought under James because they're invoking James's name in writing this gospel. Another thing to note about this gospel before we even get into it is when you hear people talk about it, you hear them immediately talk about this being one of the Christian gospels that didn't make it into the Bible. And we read this as a Christian text, but a non-biblical Christian text. And I'm highlighting that statement that we look at this as a Christian text that didn't make it into the Bible. And we're going to circle back to that in just a little bit here. So we'll pigeonhole that thought. So in the Infancy Gospel of James, we have Joachim, and we find out that he's the father of Mary and grandfather of Jesus. It refers to him as being a very rich man. It describes him as being a very religious man, and that he was very generous and he gave to the poor. So this is the description of the grandfather of Jesus. Anne is the mother of Mary and grandmother of Jesus, and she's described as being born in Bethlehem. They couldn't have any children. They were very old and have been unable to have children. Joachim goes away and prays to God for 40 days and asks for a child, and stays home and also prays to God for a child. Anne saw a laurel tree and sat down under it, and after a rest, she petitioned the Lord, saying, God of my ancestors, bless me and hear my prayer, just as you blessed our mother Sarah and gave her son Isaac to her. Then yada, yada, yada. For an angel of the Lord gone down to Joachim, saying, Joachim, Joachim, the Lord has heard your prayer. Go down from here. Look, your wife Anne has conceived in her womb. So in the Gospel of James, we have Mary being a model of holiness as a child. Her bedroom was done up like a sanctuary. When she was barely old enough to walk, she's presented at the temple. And Mary ends up living with the priests. And when she reaches puberty, she leaves the temple to find someone to take care of her. So again, I'm describing this as it's written in the Gospel of James. So the Bible has very little information on Mary, as we talked about in the sermon on Sunday. The Bible has no information on the parents of Mary, the grandparents of Jesus, and the Bible has no information on Mary's childhood. So we know that we can't find that in the Bible. But we go to the Quran, which we talked about on Sunday, and it's very similar to the Gospel of James. Imran, or Joachim, was a very religious man, like in the Gospel of James. Imran and Hannah were very old and could not conceive. By the grace of Allah, they conceived. Imran died when Mary was born. Mary was raised by the prophet Zechariah, raised by priests in the Gospel of John. So we can see some, or James, and we can see some similarity there. And Mary was given her own section of the temple to worship and study in. So here's kind of a question. It's kind of a hand grenade question for, it's more rhetorical for us to think about and muse on as we are self-reflective of our own faith. Why do we always consider the Gospel of James to be a Christian text? We call it a Christian text. It didn't make it into the Bible. It's a gospel. It didn't make it into the Bible. We clearly refer to it in a Christian context, even though it's not in the Bible. But the Gospel of James gives an extensive detail on Mary and her parents. The Quran gives the almost exact same extensive detail on Mary and her parents. The Bible gives no detail on Mary and her parents. It seems that the Gospel of James is far more connected with the Quran, far more connected with Islam than it is in Christianity. So why don't we ever hear the Gospel of James being referred to as an Islamic text or a proto-Quranic text, or however we want to phrase it? We kind of claim it as ourselves and don't even consider that it might be even more strongly connected to the religion of Islam than it is the religion of Christianity, dated as far back as 150 CE. And again, the real unpacking of that statement, we can talk about towards the end of this Bible study if we want, but it really is a whole other Bible study to really begin to talk about the development of Islam and the development of Christianity and how these things came to be. And again, within that, the difference between Paul and James. Let's see here. Do I have, is this a video that I?
There.
Yeah, this is the, let's see if this is the video that I want to play at this point. We'll skip this one. This is for my students. We'll move on from here. So in the Quran, we're talking about the adult Jesus now. In the Quran, the Islamic Quran, Jesus is mentioned 25 times by name, by the name Jesus. He's referred to as Messiah another 11 times, the Son of Mary 23 times, and he's spoken of as the Word of God, the Spirit of God, the Sign of God, and numerous other epithets over 15 different chapters in the Quran. So Jesus is a huge part of the message of the Quran. And this is just, we're not going to read this whole thing, but I just have bold print just so we can see. I do this for my students, especially my hardcore Christian ones that are like, okay, see, his name is in the Quran. I'm showing you he is talked about in the Quran. I'm not making it up. So that's all that is. So in the Quran, Jesus is born of a virgin. He performed miracles from infancy all the way through his life. He's understood as a great prophet, but not divine. And he's mentioned more often in the Quran than Muhammad. I mean, a lot of people are surprised to realize that Muhammad is only directly referred to in the Quran 3 different times, as compared to all the many times that I mentioned about Jesus being referred to in the Quran. So the Quran is really not about Muhammad. And as far as Jesus being a prophet but not divine, again, if we have another Bible study and we talk about the development of Christianity and the development of Islam, much of Christianity did not believe that Jesus was a God, did not believe that he was divine. Some of Christianity believed that he was only divine and not human. That's the Gnostics we talked about. And then there were people who thought he was a little bit of both. But there was no unified belief until hundreds of years later. The Christian theology that Jesus is 100% divine and 100% human, that came out of literally committee vote of a decision 451 years after the birth of Jesus. He was declared to be 100% divine and 100% human. All the way up to that point, there were different levels of argument of whether he was even human or divine or both or whatever. And so there was a large part of the following of Jesus early on who believed that he was only human and saw him as a great prophet, just not a God. And even things like the virgin birth or things like performing miracles, the way they understand it is it's always God performing the miracle. Just like when Moses parts the Red Sea or any other miracle that we would read about in the Old Testament, we don't read these characters of the Old Testament of being a God. We see them as a vessel through which God is working through. And that's how Muslims view Jesus, as he's merely a vessel through which God is working through. The other thing is Islam recognizes the problem of Christianity. Christianity is a proud monotheistic religion, but Christianity always has to explain their monotheism. Well, there's three gods, but it's really one, and there's Jesus and there's God, but they're really one, and there's the Holy Spirit we throw in there, but he's really one. So we have to explain it. And so Islam sidesteps it and says there is only one God, and Jesus not being a God sidesteps the whole polytheism problem of multiple gods. That he's a great person, we revere him greatly, but he's just not a God. So it's not as out of disrespect for Jesus that he's not a God, it's out of respect for a monotheistic God that he's a human prophet. The Quran mentions 25 prophets specifically. And if we look through this list, we can see that almost all the names, with just a handful of exceptions, are the same prophets, same biblical characters that we look at. We got Adam and Noah and Abraham and Isaac and Ishmael and Jacob and Job, David, Solomon. I'm just kind of going through all this. And we also have Jesus and Muhammad in this list. These are the prophets of Islam. The way Islam views the prophets is no prophet is greater than another prophet. They are all prophets of God equally. Even Muhammad is not greater than the other prophets. Muhammad is the last prophet, so his message is the most relevant because it's the last message. So the way I tell my students, it's kind of like an iPhone. If you have an iPhone 13, if the iPhone 14 comes out, well, you want the iPhone 14 because it's the most relevant. And if the iPhone 15 comes out, it's the most relevant. So you want the iPhone 15. And if the iPhone 25 is the last iPhone that's ever sold, then you always want the iPhone 25 because it's the latest, most relevant iPhone. That's kind of the way they look at it. It's not that any of these other prophets are lesser prophets, but the message of God gets updated and fine-tuned and more relevant as each prophet comes to be, and Muhammad happens to be the last prophet. Now, if you read the Quran, as we kind of mentioned before, most of Muhammad's message is about Jesus. So Jesus is the second most recent prophet, and so which puts his message one behind Muhammad technically. But Muhammad's message, the most relevant message, is almost all about Jesus, just like in Christianity. And this video I will show you because I think this is a good video. This is an imam, Christian, or I'm sorry, an imam is a Muslim minister, let's say. That's putting it in our gross language to make a connection. What we look at as a pastor or a minister, the imam plays that role within Islam. So here's an imam talking about the prophets and specifically Jesus.
When we talk about prophets, there's not an issue of equality here. They've all been sent by God with a message and with signs of prophecy. And God doesn't love one more than the other. And we don't say we love one more than the other. They're all prophets, brothers of prophecy from Almighty God. We love all of them, and we make no distinction except by saying one was the first prophet and the first man. The other, Muhammad, was the last prophet. That's the distinction we make of them. Jesus' distinction was that he was born without a father. Second thing, Jesus' distinction was that he spoke in the cradle. And Jesus' also distinction is that he was lifted up by God, and another distinction is that he will return before the end of the world. Now, those distinctions doesn't make Jesus better than another prophet. I'm talking to my friend there that just gave me the... So here, I want you to understand that if the basis of Jesus being born without a father makes him sort of like special in your eyesight, then what about Adam and what about Eve? They double special. I think, my friend and Christians that are here, no need for anybody to think that you gotta ring your bell about Jesus, because we got all the bells. We love Jesus, we think, more than you, because we believe that we understand the real Jesus, the historical Jesus that makes our love genuine and direct. Here we're saying we want to share all the love. We just want to make sure that the letter goes the right place.
So again, that just gives an example of the passion and the love that Islam has for Jesus, and they maybe frame him in a slightly different context, but all the love is there. Here's another example. We talked about this briefly in church on Sunday. When Jesus was a little child, he made birds out of clay, and he basically breathed life into them and had them fly away. The story's a little bit more detailed, but that's the Reader's Digest version of it. This is from the Gospel of Thomas. So again, another gospel that we often refer to as a Christian gospel that didn't make it into the Bible, but we can see a lot of verses within the Gospel of Thomas that made it into the Quran, but did not make it into the Bible. So we see, again, some similarities with the so-called Christian Gospels in the Quran. And then it just shows the Quran verse doing the same thing with the birds and the being made out of clay and breathe life into them. And then the last slide I have here is another video. In this one, he referred to it slightly. Let me see. Am I doing? Oh no, no, there is more here. I'm sorry. So the oh, again, this is actually two different verses. There's another verse in the Quran that talks about Jesus breathing life into the bird. This is talking about, again, the word Allah. You've all heard Islam refers to God as Allah. Well, Jesus spoke Aramaic. And the way you say God in Aramaic is Allah. So, I kind of joke in class and kind of play with my students a little bit. Well, Muslims say Allah and Jesus said Allah. Clearly different. Allah and Allah. Allah, Allah. It's a slight variation linguistically as far as just how it sounds and rolls off the tongue. In our Christian Bible, it even has Jesus saying it's a lie just because of the way it's packaging it because it's talking about my God. But when Jesus says my God, why have you forsaken me? In our Christian Bible, it actually writes that out in Aramaic, and it shows that Jesus doing this a lie language, which again is a derivative of the Allah and similar to the Allah language. I kind of just bring that to attention, nothing more than to realize Jesus didn't speak our English language and refer to God as God. And Jesus did not even use the Hebrew language and refer to God as Yahweh. Our own Bible has them speaking Aramaic, and Aramaic sounds very similar to the Arabic word for God. Now, when Jesus was killed, within Islam, Jesus wasn't actually killed on the cross. And the only reason Islam does not have Jesus being killed on the cross is to die and rise from the dead is a very godlike thing to do, and they don't view Jesus as a god. Gods in many religions, especially within the Roman and Greek religions of that region, as they're talking about it, have gods who are dying and rising again from the dead. That's a common god theme. It's the coming out of winter and the spring solstice type of a celebration. So we have Islam wanting to sidestep Jesus dying and rising from the dead. So they have the likeness of Jesus being cast on another person. They kill that other person, and Jesus is lifted up to heaven alive. So to this day, Islam believes that Jesus has not yet died, and Jesus is in heaven and will return in final judgment, just like when Christianity. So the rest of the story is exactly like Christianity as far as Jesus being raised up and Jesus will return someday. Islam believes the same thing Christianity believes. They just sidestep the whole Jesus dying on the cross bit. He has not died yet. He hasn't died and risen from the dead. Let's see here. We already did this. Okay, yeah. So talking about Islam and the Bible. So we're looking at some themes within our Christian Bible that are similar to the Islamic faith, more similar to the Islamic faith than it is to the Christian faith. And we've talked about the Bible, the development in previous Bible study. It took over 300 years for the Bible to become the Bible. And as we mentioned today and in previous studies, there are many different views of who Jesus was over those 300 years. Some of those views thought Jesus was a prophet. Some thought that he was God. Some thought that he was only a human. Some thought that he was both and had that he followed the law, or was he against the law? All these theologies were developing over 300 years, And we can find all of these theologies from all sides in the Bible, because what happened is 300 years, all these texts were collected together, but all these texts are a hodgepodge of many different theologies. So we can see how some people thought in the ancient world. The first few things I'll point out here is just how they refer to Jesus as a prophet. So this is the prophet Jesus. They didn't say Son of God. They didn't say God. They referred to Jesus as simply a prophet. Jesus referring to himself as a prophet. Prophets are not welcome without honor except in their own country, in their own house. So he's referring to himself as a prophet in this context. Then the woman said to him, "Sir, I see that you are a prophet." Again, referring to Jesus as a prophet. I, Jesus, must be on my way because it is impossible for a prophet to be killed outside of Jerusalem. Again, Jesus referring to himself as a prophet. And then he said he is a prophet. Again, just we can keep on going on and on and on, but these are just showing that the Bible through and through continues to refer to Jesus as a prophet. But within Christianity, we almost never use that phrase prophet to refer to Jesus. We might say teacher, but teacher is different than a prophet. We might say God, we might say Son of God, we might say Son of Man, but you almost rarely hear a Christian use the word prophet, but the word prophet is used throughout the Bible in reference to Jesus. And then we have these little problems in the Bible, and there are many of these problems in the Bible. This is probably one of the most, I think, dramatic ones that lead a question of God and Jesus being the same person. This is when Jesus is in the garden. He's in Garden Gethsemane the night that he's arrested and then tried and then crucified the next day. And he's praying and he drops down. He says, "Father, if it's possible, let this cup of suffering be taken away from me." And then he says, Paul's like, "But let your will be done rather than mine." So Jesus is referring to two different wills. God the Father has one will, and the Son has another will. That is almost a central definition of two different people, of having two different wills. It'd be weird to be the same person without a split personality and have two different wills. So in this one, there's two different wills, and Jesus is kind of arguing with God about whether, he should die or not. And again, my thing just went away, so let me find my thing again. There we go. Bring it back into play. And let me see, did I skip one? I think I skipped one. So here's a couple other ones. Gospel of John 7:16. Then he answered them, "My teaching is not mine, but his who sent me." So this is exactly how Islam views the prophets. The prophets are not divine. They're not God. The prophets are literally just the vessel through which God is speaking. So Jesus is saying, and in a very Islamic way, it is not my teaching, it's God's teaching. I'm just the messenger for God. That is exactly how the Muslims view the prophets. They are the messenger of God. John 14:24. Whoever does not love me does not keep my word, and the word that you hear is not mine, but it's from the Father who sent me. Again, just another case of it's not my teaching, it's not my message, it's God's message, and I'm just the one who's delivering the message. That's a very different understanding than two people being God. A couple more verses, John 5:30. By myself, I can do nothing. By myself, I can do nothing. I judge only as I hear, and my judgment is just, for I seek not to please myself, but him who sent me. So he's sent by someone else, and by myself, I can do nothing. Doesn't sound like a God. John 13:3, Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hand, and that he had come from God and was going back to God. So again, coming from God, going back to God, he's something distinctly other than God. Here's another verse. And this is actually the same thing where he is praying in the garden that let this cup be taken away from me. But now we're going to focus on the line that says, and he fell face downward on the ground and prayed. And that would put Jesus praying in the same position that Muslims still pray today. And there are actually some Christian groups that still pray in this posture as well. There are going to be Christian groups in the Middle East because it's a cultural form of how you go to prayer. But we have Jesus going to prayer with his face to the ground. I've had students kind of push back at me, go, well, he just was standing there, his face looking to the ground, and that's, you know, what in there. They're trying to come up with different examples. So I put it in a couple different languages and went a little further and fell on his face. Well, that's different than standing there and looking down at the ground. He went forward a little farther and fell face downward on the ground. Again, Jesus went a little further and he bowed with his face to the ground. So it really seems evident the way it's translated in all the languages that he was taking this position of prayer, which is very much how Muslims still pray today. And then I'm going to show another short video, and then we're about to wrap up the lecture part of this. But this video is showing a quick overview of the Islamic understanding of the end times. It goes by pretty quick, or he speaks pretty fast at least. And he's speaking in kind of like you've heard of Spanglish, people kind of breaking in and out of, you know, Spanish and English and, you know, talking really fast. Well, he's using some Muslim words and he's talking really fast, but there's a little cartoon in the background to help spell it out. And you kind of know the Christian understanding of the end time story. So you have some context. The whole point of watching this is just to see how similar the Islamic religion views Jesus' role in the second coming.
ولا يصدنكم الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وقالوا العذار العظام به ويعود الهوى ككبش دبيب بذكر الإله.
Now the Dajjal after that comes to Bayt al-Maqdis and the Imam is there and the Muslims are there and they're trying to put up a resistance. At this point, when they are inside this encampment, Allah Rabbul Izzah sends them their solution. And the solution of the Dajjal is Masih, Isa alayhi salam. So listen to, and I will rush through this. The Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam says, Isa, the son of Mary, will descend. How will he descend, Ya Rasul? His hand will be on the wings of two angels. He will be covered in two garbs, both tinged slightly yellow. Where, Ya Rasul? Next to the white minaret at the eastern side of Damascus. And subhanallah, at the eastern door of Damascus, there is a white minaret. And there is the other one of the Umayyad mosque, both white minarets. They didn't exist at the time of the Rasul, but now it is there. So Isa will come down in that place. Then he will make his way towards Bayt al-Maqdis or Jabal al-Tur. And the ahadith say, the Muslims at this stage are thinking what to do. So eventually they come to this consensus. Listen, we can't sit here forever. Let's get out and meet them face to face. So they make this decision at night that tomorrow we will open the doors and go and take the sun head on. Fajr comes, Salat of Fajr, and the adhan is given, and the lines stand up, and iqama is given. And then Subhan al-Khaliq, the area goes dark so that a man cannot see his hand. And then when light comes back, they see in Isa is the midst. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says he will lower his head and you will see like moisture on it, as though his hair is wet, but it isn't wet. And when he lifts it, beads roll down his head like liquid, like pearls, and they scatter. And he comes to the Salat of Fajr. And the Prophet says, what will be your situation? when Isa, the son of Mary, comes amidst you, and your Imam is amidst you. So Isa way behind the Mahdi for this salah. And then when the salah is finished, Isa, and the people are ready, so he says, open the door. So the doors open, and from afar, the Dajjal sees Isa alayhi salam. The false Messiah sees the real Messiah. And the hadith says he starts to melt like salt and water, and he runs, and Isa alayhi salam chases, and calling, he says, it is written that I owe you one strike. So he catches him in the Bab al-Lud in Palestine. Isa alayhi salam will strike and show the blood of the Dajjal in his sword, and the Dajjal in the battle with the Dajjal will be finished.
All right, so that was just to show you a quick overview. Again, hard to follow probably if you're not Muslim, but you could probably follow it enough to see that Jesus is the one who's going to come back and defeat evil and bring peace on earth. The last slide I have here is, this is actually the grave or the tomb, the crypt where Muhammad is buried. And right next to where Muhammad is buried is an empty crypt where Jesus is expected to be buried when he comes back. Because remember, Jesus has not died yet, because to die and rise again is a godlike thing to do. So Jesus has escaped death. Jesus is in heaven, and Jesus will return to defeat evil, but he's human. So when he finishes his task, he's going to die at some point, because humans die. And when he dies, he's revered so much in Islam that they have a crypt next to Muhammad's crypt waiting for Jesus to be buried in when the time comes. So that is, I'm going to stop sharing. That is the quick overview of Islam. We got the Mary similarities, the baby Jesus similarities during the sermon, but this was to kind of give a broader overview in revealing to us how similar Christianity is to Islam. So with that, did you guys learn anything new, and what questions do you have?
Well,
How many
everybody,
of you knew that Islam was this similar?
I didn't know.
I'm sure David knew.
And another, this is kind of a side point, but it's relevant, especially in the context of today's world. We talk about this conflict between Palestinians and Israel, Muslims and Judaism. 1/3 of Palestinians worldwide are Christian. So just wrap that around your head about what you see in the news. 1/3 of Palestinians are Christian. The last time I was over in Israel, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, one of the most religious sites for Christianity, was going over a multi-million-dollar renovation. And that multi-million-dollar renovation was being funded by the Palestinian Authority. Why would the Palestinian Authority be spending millions of dollars on refurbishing a Christian church? Because they're Christian. 1/3 of them are Christian. And so that is a side of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict we're not often privy to, is seeing, because you don't want to show Americans that 1/3 of Palestinians are Christian, because you might actually take their side then. So we kind of bury that, but and Muslims and Christians get along because they understand themselves as being similar in faith, at least in that part of the world.
So Brad, my question is, the Quran was written a lot later than our Gospels. So did they take some of the information from our Gospels and that got into the Quran?
That is where I say that this is a whole other class. But I will try to answer in 1 minute or less. The common way for a Christian to view it is to view it chronologically. And to look at Jesus was born and Jesus was Jewish, so you have Judaism. Then Christianity came to be, and you have Christianity. And then Islam came to be. Muhammad was born around 570, started preaching around 610, and so we put it there. What I hinted to in tonight's lecture is we have a lot of stuff that's in the Bible that is more Muslim than it is Christian. That's in the Bible. We have stuff that's outside the Bible, like the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of James, that is far more Islamic, especially the Gospel of James, than it is Christian. So, and then here's the other. So let's put all that. So you got this mess of a Christian theology and a Muslim theology, but there is no Christianity because we have no Bible for 300 years. It's hindsight we're calling it Christianity. When Paul's preaching, the word Christian wasn't even coined, or if it was coined, it was coined by other people calling Christians Christian, and then Christians adopted it themselves. There isn't this Christianity thing. And if during the time of Paul's the first Christian to be talking, that means there's no Gospels, there's none of that theology. Now, where do we get Christian doctrine? Like, when does Christianity become Christianity? There's a thing called the 7 ecumenical councils, okay? The 7 ecumenical councils start with the Council of Nicaea in 325, 323, 325, and then it ends in the final ecumenical council in 787. But if you look at those ecumenical councils and you say that's when Christianity is starting to develop its theology, that's when we start getting winners and losers. Is Jesus human or not human? And how much human is he? And how much divine is he? Well, in 451, we made the decision that he was 100% human and 100% divine. We're starting to make Christian doctrine, Christian dogma, and these are decisions that creates winners and losers. Well, if that happened between 325 and 787, what happened right between there? Islam. So one could argue that Islam developed during the same time that Christianity was truly developing its doctrine. And all the way up until that time, we had these seeds of following Jesus, where some people thought he was human. Some people thought he was just a prophet. Some people thought he was fully God. Some people thought he was kind of God, but not really a full God. And there are all these different theologies. We didn't start making decisions on which theology we were going to follow as Christianity until we get to the ecumenical councils, 325 to 787, and Islam was born out of that. So the way I teach it in my class, Islam and Christianity developed parallel, side by side. I can trace Islam all the way back to Jesus using literature and archaeological evidence. I can trace Jesus. I can trace Islam. This is the part I always say stuff that's earth-shattering. I can trace Jesus to the belief of the disciples in Jesus easier than I can trace Christianity to the belief of Jesus and the disciples. And that's a mind-blowing fact. Now, let me give you an example of that. Again, I went over my minute, I know. But one more minute. So here's an example of that. Jesus was Jewish, right? Jews have dietary rights because they follow the Jewish law, like don't eat pork. That's pretty much what Islam has, is these dietary rights, like don't eat pork. Jews still believe that you need to be circumcised. Christians believe that we no longer have to be circumcised. Guess what? Muslims believe you have to be circumcised. Muslims do 5 prayers a day. Do you know that Jewish people do 5 prayers a day? Jewish people do prayers 3 times a day, but within those 3 time zones, they're actually doing 5 prayers, but they're doubling up on a couple of their prayers. But Jews pray 5 prayers a day. They just do it 3 times a day. Muslims pray 5 times a day. Unless you're Shia Muslim, And Shia Muslims pray just like the Jews, 5 prayers 3 times a day. Muslims don't believe that any human could ever become a god because humans are finite and God is infinite. Logically, that's not a logical concept. How can a finite become infinite or an infinite become finite? Those are 2 concepts that can't intersect. That's a Jewish belief and a Muslim belief. If we look at the core beliefs of what Jesus as a Jewish man would have believed, his core beliefs would have more closely aligned with Islam than they would align with Christianity. And that's a very hard concept for Christians to digest. Paul comes into the picture. Paul never met Jesus a day in his life, and he is conveying this Jesus message to the Greek world, and he's packaging it in the ways that Greeks can absorb it. Like, you don't have to cut off the end of your thing. You don't have to be circumcised. You can keep eating your pork sandwiches. You can keep doing these things. You don't have to follow these Jewish laws. Jesus actually freed you from these Jewish laws. And Jesus is packaging things differently, where James, the brother of Jesus, we have evidence in the Bible that James is saying you need to be a good Jew and you need to follow the Jewish laws. You need to be circumcised. You need to do your 5 prayers a day. You need to do all of these things that Muslims still do today. That was James's message that we can still find in the Bible today. And then coincidentally, when we find later gospels like the infancy gospel of James, written in the tradition of James, but not by James, it seems to align with more things that are in the Quran than we find in the Bible. And so we have a tradition of, get my hand in front of me, a tradition of James and a tradition of Paul, who are preaching side by side, and they were kind of enemies. The book of Acts tries to make them frenemies, but at the best you can make them frenemies. But if you actually listen to Paul, they're probably more enemies than they are frenemies, but they clearly have opposing theologies, even in the Bible. And then you follow that from James and you follow it from Paul. And if you're doing the research, you can see the development step by step through time until it gets to the Bible and the 7 ecumenical councils, or until it gets to Islam. And so there's your long answer to the answer that I promised would only take a minute. And actually, my one course that I teach, Moses, Jesus, and Muhammad, pretty much the entire course, it takes me 15 weeks, 2-hour and 15-minute lectures every week to get that message across to my 18-year-old students, the message that I just tried to explain to you in 5 minutes. So there's a lot to unpack there.
What are you doing?
David.
Stop. You lay down.
Yeah.
All right, lay down, Brad.
Okay. Yeah, David.
Yeah. We can see those threads that you're talking about, but I'm asking the question now. We don't have a Muslim critical textual history to uncover those threads. They have a different concept of the Quran as a divine gift that would suggest that those threads are less significant to them than they are as you're sharing with us. Am I correct on that?
That is mostly true, but not completely true. And where I say it's mostly true is there is a growing Muslim critical thought that is happening. I think they're 1 or 2 generations behind us. Just think of Christianity 2 generations ago. 2 generations ago, I mean, you weren't doing anything near the critical thought we're doing now in Christianity. Even if you weren't a literalist, I mean, when you guys were, I'm looking at a screen of people who may be slightly older than me. So I'm just going to say, when you were 15 years old and questioning life, when you were 15 years old, how openly could you question the truth of Adam and Eve? and so Christianity really is not that far into our own critical thought. And Islam is just starting to get into that critical thought. And I do have books written by Islamic scholars that I use for the class and that I could recommend to anyone who wants to do some deeper reading on these matters. But there is research. I didn't come up with this on my own, so there is research on this that we can have out there. I will tell you, when I teach in my class, teaching the exact same topic, my fundamental Christian students and my fundamental Muslim students hate me for very different reasons teaching the exact same topic. So picture this. I'm tracing Islam back to the disciples. Well, how do you think my fundamental Christian students think about that? And then by using that same logic, I am showing the development of a human-made religion of Islam over the course of hundreds of years that eventually becomes the Quran. My Muslim students hate that because the Quran came from Allah. Everyone knows that. In 610, he started reciting it to Muhammad. Muhammad, starts reciting it to us. So my Muslim students don't want to hear me trace it back to the disciples, even though you would think that they'd want me to. But I'm showing a more of a human-made religion at that point, rather than a divine God top-down religion. So both Muslims and Christians hate me in my class. And I'm teaching Muslims fresh off the plane from Pakistan, from Saudi Arabia, from Syria, around the world, and I'm teaching them this stuff.
Well, even though I said that
We don't know what you
their concept of the Quran is a divine gift, there's Christians who have the same kind of view about the Bible.
Exactly.
So,
And again, even the Christians that don't have that view of the Bible, there's a wide chasm between the literalist Christian that we all roll our eyes at, or at least I think most of us on this screen probably roll our eyes at the very literalist Christian. It reads every word as the word of God. If it said a donkey talked to the guy who was riding them, then a donkey talked to the guy who was riding them. It was in the Bible, it happened. And then you have extreme scholarly thought where it is looked at as a historical document, a man-made historical document. Those are your two wide chasms. Even your progressive Christians tend to fall somewhere in the middle. They don't want to give everything up. In this church, which I think that you guys are all very intelligent, very open-minded. I say this in everything, but I believe it. You guys are very intelligent, open-minded, progressive-minded Christians. And I know already in a Sunday school class, I just mentioned off the cuff that Moses never existed. And about half the Sunday school class fell off their chairs. Even on the very progressive end of Christianity, we're not as progressive as we think we are. We're still holding on to some of our fundamental beliefs. With that, we're at 8 o'clock. The one thing that I'll kind of say with this is when we're talking about things with Judaism and Islam or any other religion at that point, whenever we get to Buddhism or Hinduism or anything like that, there's a beauty in looking at our similarities, but there's also a danger in looking at our similarities in the sense that we tend to conflate. Just because Islam has a very similar view of Christianity or of Jesus that we do doesn't mean that we have the same religion. So we can't conflate our religion into theirs. We have similarities, but there are differences. Just because 2/3 of our book is the Hebrew scripture, the Jewish scripture, so there's a lot of Judaism in our faith, it's beautiful to see the similarities we have with Judaism, but we also need to, at the same time, respect the differences. Judaism, we've done a lot of different things. Judaism doesn't believe in original sin. The idea of original sin, that reading of the Adam and Eve taking a bite out of the apple, that's an invention of a later Christian father who later came up with that idea, and it became Christian doctrine. but that is not how Judaism sees the Adam and Eve story. So I just say that as we look at the beauty of us seeing our similarities, there is this uncomfortable balance of embracing our similarities, but also still respecting our differences that we have. With that, we are at 8:02. We kept it to an hour and 2 minutes. So with that, again, if anyone else has questions, thoughts, wanted to know books that I use in my class or anything like that, I'd be happy to talk to you folks about that. And I'm going to be doing, I understand, some Sunday school classes in the new year. I have a whole pocket full of material, but if there's anything that I talked about that sparks an interest, I'd like to learn more about this or that, I can go down any avenue you folks want to go down, but I got a lot of information out here. But with that, I'll see you all later.
Thank you,
Okay.
Brad.
Thank you very much,
Brad,
Brad.
Thanks,
appreciate it.
everybody.
Good night, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Good night.
Good night.